Hey guys, so we're back for part 2 of our tutorial, and we're going to be moving on to adding some more elements and details to our scene. So for the first step, I think a good idea that we should lay out is the birds we might be adding to our scene. So we're going to test out how that looks. And so I've downloaded this pigeon asset for free on the internet. I'll include it since it was just a free model. And we're going to modify this a little bit right now using some of Houdini's basic modeling tools just to kind of get the shape looking a little better. And we're going to try to just use a bend deformer to get the wings to flap and see how we could cycle that out. And eventually we'll take this into our scene as its own asset that will scatter using the Houdini Pops tools. And so hopefully the plan is that we'll get a nice little flight path of a couple birds going across our shot. So for now, let's work on this model. So if we come in here, right now the problem is that it's like standing, and so we need this to kind of look like it's a little more in flight and rotate it down a bit. So if we look at some reference of just a pigeon flying or a bird flying here, we can tell that the tail and the head kind of become straight and the legs kind of tuck in a little bit. So we basically need to move our body, make some adjustments here, maybe flatten this out a little and tuck in the neck and tilt this up. And I mean, we're going to be pretty far away from these, and there's going to be motion blur and stuff, so it doesn't have to be accurate, really. We don't need a lot of detail. It's just an extra subtlety that'll add life to the scene, but it's not the focus of the scene. So to do that, let's just make some quick edits. Now, I know a lot of you guys don't model in Houdini. A lot of people just model in another package like Blender or Maya. And so we're going to actually explore just some of the basic modeling tools. So if you guys haven't modeled in Houdini, you know, this is some really basic stuff, and I'll kind of just go over it briefly. So first thing we want to do is we're going to push back these legs. So let's just drop down an edit SOP, and we're going to come in here. And so when you drop down an edit SOP, you can select either, when you hit the number keys, 1 takes you to the full object, 2 takes you to point selection mode, 3 gives you edges, and 4 gives you polygons. Now if you press the point key twice, it should, what's going on here? Let's select this. If you switch to, it should, if you switch to like a, what's going on here? Okay, there we go. To like a transform tool with the T key, you could have all the options ticked on. So you see right here in this corner, you can see the points, edges, and primitives, which are polygons. If you press the number keys, it switches between them. But if you press the 2 key, which is points, twice, so if you go around, it'll give you the last key that you used. And then also you could select them all 3, which would give you everything. So it's kind of like a multi-tool if you come from Maya. This gives you, so you can select edges, polygons, and whatnot. We're going to just be using the points, really, for what we're doing. I think points is more than enough. So we'll stick to points. And what we want to do is turn on mirroring. So right now the object is mirrorable. It's symmetrical down the middle. So if we come down to our edit, on our edit SOP, you'll notice there's this option called use mirror. So we're going to click that. Now normally when you hit the T key, it just gives you the transform option. So you get this little transform widget. And up here there's your different edit types. So you could slide on the surface, You could peak, which is really useful if you want to make ridges and stuff. There's the sculpt, and then there's the tweak mode. So we're going to be using the tweak mode in particular for this. But just so you can see what slide does, it lets you just slide around the point without actually moving necessarily on the surface. This is useful if you need to slide edge loops and stuff. And so we're going to just use the regular edit with tweak mode. So when you're in edit, it lets you, you know, move stuff around. And you can see that we're mirroring across. And tweak mode, when you activate tweak mode, this little button up here. So if you hit Shift T, it lets you do edits without having to see the little transform node tool thing. So you could just pull, and it lets you kind of dynamically edit things, right? And then if you want soft selection, you could just roll your mouse wheel up, and it'll soft select. So if we were to pull this, you can see how it's mirroring across on our pigeon. So cool. Let's shrink that down. And what we want to do is we actually want to move our feet, or our legs I should say, tilt them back. So let's select a couple things here. So let's go into selection mode, and there's different selection modes. You guys could try selecting the primitives. You guys could use the laser or the brush select. So like brush select lets you kind of quickly go in here and select some points. And you could change the scale of the brush a couple different ways. There's hotkeys, and then there's the radius up here. So let's just drop the radius or increase the radius. And you can see there's a circle. It's a little subtle, so the recording might not show it, but there's a circle right there. Let's increase this to, let's just do 40. We want a nice big round selection, so we're going to select all this stuff. Come in here, make sure our bottom is selected. Yep. And let's select that. Okay, cool. So let's do a transform. So we're now switching into transform mode, and actually it unselected my selection for some reason. So let's reselect everything again. And we have soft select activated, so we can use the mouse wheel to increase it. And you'll notice up here in the soft radius, as I roll the mouse, it increases or decreases our selection. So I'm going to try something like this, and we'll see how this does if we start to just move this. Let's just see what happens. Oops. And actually, what's going on here? So we're going to transform this. Let's just push this leg back a bit. And let's actually rotate this, see if we can transform again. We're probably gonna have to bulk up the leg a little bit more since it's kind of funny looking. And we'll rotate it further. Actually, no, I think we're gonna have to now come in here and select some more stuff to tweak here. So let's select these points. And actually, let's come to the side. Let's curl the toes. a little bit. Let's decrease our soft select. Oops. And let's rotate these out. And again, let's come back in here. And let's actually grow this a little. So make these a little thicker. Let's decrease our soft radius a little bit. And what's neat about Houdini is you could notice that I selected the points, and while I scroll, it dynamically can change the selection. So I could scroll a little and adjust what's being influenced. So that's pretty cool. Let's select this. Shrink that down. And let's decrease our radius a little bit so we get a little more control. Let's do 25. And actually, let's activate the select visible geometry only. So that way I don't select the back leg. I mean, we could actually just make a group, but let's just do it this way. Not that. Unselect that. Just give our legs a little more girth. And actually, I should probably rotate the whole thing and decrease the stomach a little bit and the neck. So let's do that now. Oops. Let's make that a little bigger. All right. Actually, Let's select this back toe also. And rotate it. Transform it again. And I think we could just bring back down the individual toes now. And then we'll rotate the whole bird as a whole. And its legs are a little small compared to it's a little big right here on the gut. So let's see if we can scale this. See what happens. Might not work. Oh yeah, I guess it could work. Let's transform again. We'll probably end up pulling the tail a little further out also. Alright. Let's select the toe. And actually, that's a problem. We've got a gap here. Or we need a gap here, actually. So, yeah, it looks like the geometry is trying to merge. Let's check out wireframe here. Uh-oh. When did this happen? Okay, when I scaled it. Come in here, separate them a little. Alright. Let's select this. Curl that up. Bring it down a bit. And we'll select the other toes. bring them in. Let's check out what we've got. And we could probably straighten them out a little, flatten them. But to be honest, you know, it's a subtle detail that really isn't going to be that relevant in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to just keep adjusting things the same way that I just showed you guys. So just going around, tweaking the body a little, making him, he's a little too fat right here, and adjusting him. And then once we get to using a bend deformer to try to get these wings to flap, we'll move on to that next. So I'm going to just pause this so you guys don't have to watch me just going around making little adjustments like this for the next 15 minutes. But hopefully you guys can see how pretty useful the modeling tools are in Houdini and how they're dynamic. I could adjust the amount of soft radius and all that stuff mid process, and I could have kept adding edits and disabling them and stuff. So if we just check out what we've got, this is where we were before, and so we've pushed the legs back and we made them a little thinner up here in the neck. So we're going to push the stomach in and extend the tail next. And so I'm going to, like I said, I'll pause that for now so you guys don't have to see me doing that. And then we'll move on to using the deformer to get the wings to flap. So I'll be back, guys. Alright guys, so we're back. So I'm just going to quickly go over the edit that I did. As you can see, this is what we started out with. And I ended up just kind of moving the legs back, stretching out the tail a little, shrinking the neck. And I transformed everything down, so we're now in a somewhat flying looking position from a distance. It looks pretty good. And I just made a group for the wing, as you guys can see here. And so that way we could just adjust the wing deformation on its own when we use the bend sop. So cool. So let's get to bending this. So if we come down here, start typing in bend, we'll get the bend sop. So let's plug that in. Let's highlight that, and we're going to use our group. And so our group name is wing bend on the point, so we'll copy that. We're going to paste that in. And I think it'll guess it fine, so I don't have to specify its points. And so the bend sop makes this little widget thing that tells it where to start and where to end the bending. So we want it to start bending inside towards the center of our bird. So let's first move this up, and let's move it this way. And so we'll just make this 4 and -4 just to keep it simple. And next thing we need to do is rotate this so that our bend is actually going this way across our wing instead of backwards. So if I go to capture length, this is the length of the bending. So if I were to bend this right now bend is at 0. If I bend this, you'll notice that our wing is bending, but it's only bending this way. And if we wanted to make something complex, we could add a little subtle bend here on top of the bending this way, but honestly this is going to be seen at a distance like that. So those little details, I think, with the motion blur and stuff isn't going to matter. So we're not going to add little movements like that. We're going to just focus on just getting the wings flapping. So what we need to do is actually rotate this. So our capture direction, as they call it, needs to be rotated. So here, if we start moving this, you'll see that it's rotating the direction. Or you could use this right here to rotate it. We're going to do something like 0.8, 0.9. We'll see if we need to adjust it. Just to give it a little, not perfectly straight out, we'll give it a little bit of an angle. And if we start to move it around, we'll notice that, cool, we've got our bending wing now. For a little extra detail, we could add a little bit of twist. And so it bends and twists the deformation a little bit. I think 20 will be a little nicer so that the wing flaps open. So if we do this, it swings down, swings up, and down. See, it gives it that nice little bulge right here. So it's not too flat, just a little difference. Instead of the taper mode for being linear, we're going to do smooth. In case we do decide to add a little bit of tapering. For now, we'll just keep that off. And the capture length, we could adjust this further. I think if we let's flatten that out. Let's do 1. And let's look at it from above. I think the capture length is okay. We might increase it just a bit in case we need to bend up to here. Let's see if we 11 versus 10. It just pulls the wing up a bit more. Let's see. Down. I think 11's a little better. It's not too tight upward, so I think that'll work. Okay, cool. So yeah, that's simple to get our wing bending and just using a group. So we're not doing any complex kind of animation. This is just a basic bend deformer to flap the wings. And we could maybe add one extra for the tail. Build another bend sop and have that flap up and down a little. And we'll have just both kind of moving. But for now, let's, I want to show you guys how to do this, and then you guys could do the tail on your own. So now we need to replicate this to the other side. So in order to mirror this, there's a mirror sop. We need to actually get rid of the other half. So we're going to drop down a blast. And this is going to delete everything. And we're going to use the group to select what we want to delete and what we want to keep. So let's use the marquee tool. And we want it to go through all our points. So we're going to disable the visible geometry only. And let's get a different perspective. I'm going to come in here, and I think that's almost everything. Let's get these guys right here. And that should be all the points. Let's check everything. Oh, nope. We're missing a few here. So let's get the top. Okay, check all the rest. Got to get the beak. And let's check side. Oops, that's our UVs. Everything looks okay. Oh no, we're still missing a little bit on the beak. Let's check with wireframe mode activated. And that should be everything. Oh, nope. Missed the spot right here. Let's look around. Make sure we got perfectly down the middle our selection, and it does look okay. So let's hit enter. And that will delete 1/2 of our bird. Right down the middle. And so what we need to do now is drop down a mirror SOP, and this will mirror our bird. Now the points are not welded yet in the center, so we actually need to also drop a fuse, and this will just make sure that all our points after we mirrored are merged together and are actually one point. And let's just drop down a normal SOP just to make sure there's some normals on here. There should be, but okay, cool. So now we've got our bird flapping its wing. And if we were to animate this bend, this is the result we'd be getting. Pretty neat. And so all we've got to do now is basically animate this motion here, and then we could use the make loop SOP, and it'll just loop it for us. Automatically. Depending on how fast we want the wings to flap, we're gonna have to check out some tests using the flipbook just to get an idea of how things are looking. But I mean, from a distance, you know, if we're looking at it like this, I think everything's gonna be okay. If we start seeing the bending going back and forth here, so I think that's plenty good. And I might actually, like I mentioned, animate the tail using the same thing, the bend deformer, but I'll be doing that further down the chain, just bending down the middle the tail a little bit, and maybe the beak, the head, just to have a little bit of movement. And actually we could just do that right now. So let's drop down another bend. Let's highlight our bend, and all we've got to do is just quickly move it into position. We want it to be somewhere in the center. We might push it back a little bit to start the bending somewhere around here. And for some reason our fall off is not being visualized, which is kind of weird. Usually you could see the fall off, so I think there's a bug. I'll probably have to restart Houdini so that shows up, because it should be visible and it's not, even though it's checked on. And actually let me pause this and restart just to make sure that comes back so you guys can see how this is working. So I'll pause this. I'm going to save, and I'll be right back. Alright guys, I'm back. So yeah, the visualization is now showing. And this is going to show the fall off of our tail deformer. So let's move this a little further. Maybe we'll do something like this. And let's just see what the bend. We're not going to bend this much. So let's move our capture length to something like 10. And we might need to move to make a separate group so that only the tail is influenced and not the feet. So we just come up here, hit the group button, do something like that. Let's just hit enter. And so there we go. We've got a little bit of movement here that we could adjust. Depending on what we want to do. Maybe something like this. So maybe make a little subtle movement. And actually let's make a little bit more of a gradient. And let's move it back a little bit. Cool. So now we've got our moving tail that we could animate, maybe just cycle back -10 to 1 or something, just so it's a subtle little bit of movement. And maybe we'll even do the feet that way, so that they can kind of tuck in a little better. And so when all those things are moving together, it should give it a good amount of life. And yeah, let's actually just test that out. A quick animation test, I guess, to see how it'll look. We could do this with keyframes, so I think we'll just do that. And actually, before we keep going forward, let's shade this. So let's drop down a material. And the group name is pigeon, since it's the entire object. Let's come into our mats. Let's drop down to Redshift Builder. Call this pigeon shader. Let's drop down a builder or a Redshift material. Oops. plug that in. Let's get our file texture down, or texture, and let's load up our necessary stuff. So we should have, where is it? Texture. Is it in here? Actually, oh, I need to move it. Right now it's inside of the geo folder. So let me move that manually. Alright, I just copy pasted it in there. So inside of texture we have, here we go, our 3 textures. So we're going to just load up color, duplicate this 4 times. This is going to be our reflection. Yeah, well, I don't even think we'll need that, but well, I'll try it and see what it does, how it looks. And we've got our normal, or our bump. I'll just use bump, or we could try normal. Let's see what happens. And we'll just keep this to the side for now. Let's scoot this over. Let's drop down our redshift bump. And if you guys installed that neat plugin for the viewport, I'm gonna right click this, set up for OpenGL. Sure, we don't have a metal map, so it doesn't really matter. We're gonna plug this in here, input. We'll make this object, I believe the texture's object space, not 100% sure. Overall, bump input. This is going to go into our reflection color, and this is going to go into our diffuse. So if we right click this, set up as OpenGL, we'll click diffuse. Let's switch over to high quality here, and this is our reflection. So I guess specular would be what it uses. And this is our normal. OpenGL normal. And so now I just need to assign that, this shader. So come back to our object, into our material, and select our pigeon shader. And there we go. In our viewport, we've got our pigeon. Nice. And it's a pretty good, representation. It's not super accurate, but I think this gives us a good idea of how it's going to look from a distance. Seeing this thing fly by. And we might adjust the texture map to make some of them a little lighter and whatnot once we actually scatter them. So we'll see how it looks in our scene once we bring it in. But this is, I think, a good basic little setup here. And so now it's just time to keyframe and animate the movements. I'm going to actually deform the legs a little and the head movement before we do the keyframe animation. So I'm not going to show you guys that, since I already showed you how I did it with the tail and the wings. So I'm just going to pause this step and make the legs move and the head move a little, and then we'll come back and start keyframing the animation and prepare it so that we can export it to our scene, and then use the swarming pop solver so we could have a couple birds flying across our scene. And that'll be the next step. Cool. Hey guys, so I'm back. I rigged up the tail, the legs, and the head and wings to move a little bit, and I also added a little bit of a twist just to kind of give a little difference so it's not too flat and perfect. Head's turning a little bit and stuff like that. And so if we come in here, let's move this up a bit, you'll notice that we've got the bends And so there's a few bend parameters in here that are doing different things. And actually, why am I getting an error? Texture sample 3 scale and parameter. Okay, that's a little weird. Well, anyways, yeah, let's work on the movement. So let's make a little bit of an animation. So we've got a little bit of movement here and stuff. So what we need to do is let's make a null, and we're going to actually make this our control rig, which will control these bend parameters all in from one area. That way we don't have to go clicking each one of these nodes and stuff like that. It'll take longer. So let's edit the parameter interface, and we'll just make these invisible since we don't need those. And what we need is we need to bring in our bend attribute here, and we're going to bring those in and just give them names. And that way we can control all these from our null. And actually, instead of null, we'll just call this our animation rig. Let's highlight that. All right. And so what we're going to need is, we might animate the twist a little bit. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. So we need one. How many bends do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got 4 bends. So we need 4 float values. So I'm going to come over here and make 4. And we'll call this wing bend. And we'll call this, what's bending here? Bend 2. That's the tail. And bend 3 is the legs. Leg bend. And the last one's the head. Alright, let's just hit apply. And so we should have our parameters here. Cool. And let's come in here. Our first bend, we need it to go cycle between -90 and 9. So what we're going to do here is for wing bend, and I don't know why it didn't save that. Let's apply. We want to float, and for our values and stuff like that, we could change that. We want a range, so we're going to do -90 to 90. We're going to lock it into place. For our tail bend, where's that at? I think we'll do -30 or -30 to 0. So we'll make that a range of -30, 0, lock that in, we'll apply. And for our leg, there's our leg here. We're going to do -25. We'll do -40 to 0. Yeah, let's do that. So -40 to 0. We'll lock that in also. We'll apply. And finally for our head, do -25 to 0. I think we'll be fine. Or maybe we'll go up a little more to 15. So 15 to -15. So -15, 15. And we'll lock that in and apply. So if we go to our little rig here, and why is this not labeled? Leg bend. Alright, so now we've got our wing bend, our tail bend, and our head bend. And so we need to apply these to our bends. So we're going to come into bend 4. We're going to copy this parameter. Actually, no, we want to copy the head bend here. Copy this parameter and paste a relative reference. And we're going to do that for all our parameters here. So leg bend, copy parameter. Where's that at? There we go. Come up with the bend 3, paste relative reference. And actually, we can just name the rest. So what we'll do is we'll go up to bend 2, we'll paste the relative reference, and we'll just change the name from leg to tail. Oops. And finally, our wing bend, paste relative reference, and we'll call this wing. And so that now has all our controls. So if we slide things around, you can see that the head's moving, the legs are moving, tail's moving, and wings are flapping. Cool. So now we've got this little animation rig, and actually I think I could just disconnect it and it'll still work. Yeah. Neat. So we'll keep this to the side. And so now that we've got this built, let's and we might maybe also work on the twist for the tail or the head. If we really want to, you know, take this pigeon rig a little further, so we could reuse this in the future. Might do that on off camera. I'll probably add these extra parameters. Actually, you know what? I'll just do it right now. It's quick. So let's do another float, and we'll call this tail twist. And if we come up to the tail, we're doing 15 and probably -15. Yeah, so let's do that. So 15 and -15. Let's do a range. -15, 15. Lock that. We'll apply it. And we'll do the same for the legs. And actually let's see what the range is there. So it's -20. So we'll just duplicate this, bring it down to leg bend. Here we go. And actually this is leg twist, leg twist, -20, 20. Let's apply. And we'll duplicate this, and we'll do this as head twist. And the amount will be also 20 and -20. So let's apply that. And all we got to do is just copy our channels in here. So let's copy that. Or actually, we'll just copy it here. Head twist, copy. Paste relative reference. And we'll do the legs. But this will be leg. And we'll paste again. And this is tail. Cool. So if we move that out of the way, we're centered now. And our little rig here should be able to twist the tail either way we want. Should be able to move the legs. Yep. And our head moves around. Cool. Alright, so that was quick. So now we've got these movements that we could all control here. So let's close this custom parameter. Let's save. And now we should just animate these sliders here with keyframes, and then we're going to make it cycle and loop infinitely. And with that, we can then export this, now that it's ready, into our main scene, and then we'll use pops to scatter a few of these, and then we'll have the particles come in at different frames, so it'll look like they're all flapping at different points. And so at this point, you need to look at a little bit of reference. So we're going to have the bird flap its wings a couple times, then have a slower flap, and then take a pause, and then have it loop again. That's what I think our goal is here. So our final shot, I think, was 150 frames. So we want it to at least cover that, so that when we randomly select points, it'll have enough coverage to kind of give it a unique point, so they don't all look the same. So we're going to just go with 144 for now. And if we need to overextend it, that's okay. Or underextend it, that's fine. Just give us enough room for this shot. And what we're going to do is we're going to first deal with animating the wing flap. And so what we're going to do is we want, and let's come in here and deal with smaller frames. We want the wing to flap pretty quickly at first, so we're going to start off at a stationary point. So if you hit Alt and click, that puts down a keyframe. And so we're going to have frame 4 flap up, and we're going to click Alt, drop another keyframe. Frame 8, we're going to go back to 0, drop another keyframe, and frame 12, And actually, this isn't frame 0, this is frame 1, so I need to shuffle this back. Oh, and to drag keyframes around, just hold the middle mouse button, and you can move them around easily. And on frame 10 here, we're going to do -90. And hold Alt, click. And so right now that's giving us opening and downward. And so we could cycle this infinitely already. But before we do that, actually, let's do a little, let's see how fast this is actually moving. And also we want this movement to be probably not like this. We probably want it to be linear, so it doesn't have a fade in and a fade out. So let's actually open up the animation editor and then check out what the this is doing. So if you hold the shift key and click, and actually it popped out off screen, there we go, you open up the animation editor in Houdini. So let's move this to the side. And so the animation editor is pretty powerful. It's got the dope sheet. You could switch to the table or to the graph, which lets you see. Let's shrink this down. Exactly what's going on here. And we should select our parameter. So if we come in here, you'll see that we've got it going from 0 down to -90. So this is 90, -90, and this is our 0 point. And so if we scroll through here, this is frame 1. You'll see how it works. And so then we can make this cycle right now just to kind of check it out. So let's, if you right click the wing bend, which is this parameter up here. And actually let's make this linear, so it's not a curve. So when you select these points up here, you have options for constant. We're going to pick straight. And so that'll give us a straight linear movement. And we'll actually test both. We'll see. Or actually, let's try this one first and see how it looks. And then if we don't like how it looks animated, we'll switch over to linear. And so to cycle this, you have your parameter here. You just right click it. And under motion effects, there's a couple different options. We're going to pick cycle. And so this will open up another menu over here that shows you your movement cycling frame to frame. And so let's actually check out how this is looking. We might not end up needing this. We might delete it later, but let's keep this over here. For now, let's just preview what we've got. And actually, we want to cycle up to here. And I believe we needed to come back up also to make a proper cycle that we could do back and forth. But let's just test this and see how it looks. So let's bring up the flip book. We're just going to start a flip book here. Give that a second to open up. And oops, this is only 13 frames. Let's increase this to, I don't know, let's do 60. And let's remake our flip book. and let that render. And let's test that out. And I mean, that's okay. I don't think we need to linearize it. I think it looks all right. So cool. Now we've got our wings flapping, and it's cycling infinitely, our flap. And since we use the bend deformer, we're getting a little bit of movement in the chest and stuff. So pretty neat. Okay, now what we want is we don't want it to just do this forever, since birds actually take breaks flapping. So they might flap a couple times and then they'll kind of go into cruising mode and hover a little bit, you know, glide, and then they'll start flapping again. And then when they go into gliding mode, the flaps get slower, and when they start flapping again, they start slower and then speed up. So we're going to do that right now. So what we need to do next is, actually let's get rid of our cycle here. We'll just kill this for now, since we're going to end up cycling everything again. And I want to see how it looks manually keyframed. So if we come in here, let's come deeper into our frames, and let's select our little animation rig here. So we've got this one cycle, and what we need to do is duplicate this a few times. So we're going to switch over the dope sheet right here. If you click this icon, make it a little bigger for you guys to see. Select this icon right here. It swaps you over to the dope sheet. And actually, let me save the scene just in case. And inside of here, you could select frames and move them around if you want. You could do different things. So there's different modes for the dope sheet. Right here is the selection mode, which is the S tool. So this lets you select something and drag it around. So if you want to move it this way or something, it's similar to doing it down here with the middle mouse, but this is with left. You just left click, select, and then drag, left click. But we want to just repeat this pattern. So what we have to do is switch over to the region tool. You select this, and this lets you select a region. So we're going to select these frames, and we're going to copy this. So you're going to right click, copy. And what we want to do is we want this to repeat now. I don't know, let's just say up to here. We'll see how many it makes for us. Or actually, we could do the math so we could cycle this multiple times. So I believe this is, what is this total? 10 frames. So what we would need if we wanted this to cycle 5 more times, so we just need to add 50 to 10, so up to 60. So let's move this way and move this to frame 60. And so now that we've got this space selected, you could right click it, and under paste special, there's cycle at region selection, and this will paste these keyframes with the same amount of spacing and fill in this gap for us automatically, which is pretty neat. So let's move that over. And so now, if we actually switch over to the graph, and for some reason this one went full -90, but these went to 0, which is weird. I'm gonna have to check why that happened, because now it's not. What's going on here? Yeah, it didn't go all the way down. So need to undo one of those frames. But you can see how when I pasted it in there, it added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the 6th final loop up. So what we need to do is have it actually get the bottom negative. It didn't paste in correctly. So let me do that right now. And that was just due to our keyframing being off and not going into a full loop. So we're going to select these actually and delete them. So come in here and delete those keyframes. And we actually need another keyframe right here. And this keyframe needs to go up to, I believe, 0. Is that where we're at? To 0. So let's click this. Let's type in 0 and Alt click. And this should now, yeah, now we're back to our original position. Okay, so let's do that again. So let's select these points. Copy this. And also, pretty neat, you could actually slow this down. If you middle mouse click, I believe shift. Yeah, shift and middle mouse click and drag. You see how it's doing that? It just made our flapping slower. So we're going to use that to make our flap slower at the end. Okay, so our total frames were 13 now. So what we're going to want to do is multiply this. So let's select our little region here. We're going to copy. And we need, since it's 13, let's just say we're going to multiply it by a factor of 5. So we're going to just go to 65. So frame 65. And we're going to paste it in here. And the hotkey is B, but I'm just showing you guys like this. So cycle at region selection, and that should give us our loop here. And if we check the graph, now we've got our full loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we move up to 6. So let's expand this. And let's see what we've got here. And it ended right here. So now we could do another bring down, but we'll make this one slower from this point forward now. And then we'll have it pause. The keyframe we'll pause it maybe at I don't know. We don't want it to be perfectly 0 because I think 0 itself will be kind of boring. So if we were to do 0 here, and actually where did we go? Normally we would keyframe this spot right here to 0. So let's keyframe. But 0 I think looks kind of boring. It's too flat. So maybe we'll do negative like 15 or something. So that looks more like a bird that's coasting, And so we're going to spread this apart. So maybe it flaps a little, the down flap is a little slower at this point. And then we'll maybe have this pause like this. We can maybe move it a little bit, subtlety. And we'll keep the last final 144, we'll make this back to 0. And so this, since we started at 0, should loop right back to the start, and then it'll flap again, then do another final slow flap or something. And we could fill in this area with a little more noise. So let's test this out and see how this looks using the flipbook. So give this a second. And let's check it out. And actually, why did it pause somewhere right there? That was kind of weird. Yeah, right there. Where was that? Frame. Okay, something's going wrong right here, frame 24. So I'm gonna have to check on that. But yeah, without that pause, I think we would be fine. And so then we'll just add a little bit of movement right here during this stage, just to simulate like the wind hitting it or something. And so that'll give us a break where the bird is just hovering, and then there's the point where it's flapping. And then all we got to do is just fill in little movements for the tail and the head and twist using these other parameters the same way. And then at the end, you just hit cycle on the parameter, and it'll just cycle out that effect. And actually, here's the keyframe where that problem is. So this needs to be actually -90. And so that's why it stalled out right there. So what frame is this right here? This is frame 22. So yeah, frame 22, -90. Let's just make sure this is full -90. And let's save. And let's flipbook to make sure the movement's smooth. Okay, yeah, that fixed it. So now we've got cruising, and we'll add some keyframes for little flaps in this stage. Yeah, looks good. All right, so I'm gonna pause this, guys, because I kind of just covered how to use the dope sheet and these curves and some of the parameters, and I'm just gonna do the same thing, but to these other custom parameters that we made. And I'm going to probably adjust the curves a little bit so that we get, in this stage right here, little movements up and down. Not as big as this where it opens the wing fully. And so, just like I did right here. So if I actually, well, let's just make it real quick so you guys can see it. So maybe at this stage, we'll put down another keyframe. And we'll maybe lift it a little bit. And maybe over here, we'll put another keyframe down. And we'll lower it. And right here, we'll put down another keyframe. And we'll raise it. And so this will give us some movement, but not as rapid and not as sharp. So if we check that out again using the flipbook, you see we've got a little bit of movement there. Cool. All right, so now we're just going to apply these same techniques to the tail to the twisting a little, to the legs, and to the head and the twists. And so when we have all these things animated moving together here, hopefully it'll look okay. And again, guys, this is going to be really far away anyways. We're going to be viewing this from like, you know, some angle this far. So if we do a flip book of it from this far away, and for some reason it's freaking out, but hopefully it works. Yeah, that looks good, you know, from a distance. And so with a little more subtle movement, the motion blur and all that stuff, it'll look fine. It's going to read. So, but these little elements, stuff like this, gives your scene a lot more life, especially environments. A lot of people miss out on little subtleties, movement, and that's what gives environments a lot more life than just static stuff. So cool. Let's. I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna just animate the rest of these parameters on the pigeon. And you guys will end up getting this pigeon file, so you guys could use it for whatever you guys want. I used to have one for Maya set up, but now that I'm using Houdini, I haven't actually animated a bird rig like this yet, so this will be pretty useful. And what's neat is you could use this for other birds. If you make another bird model, you just plug in your bird model up here, because Houdini's procedural. Make your new group and adjust the bend distances, and you're good to go. So cool. Let's yeah, I'll be back. Hey guys, so I'm back after animating a couple different parameters that we built, the leg and all that stuff. And so if you just check out what it's doing, if we just hit play, we've got the wings flapping, and then they slow down and they kind of flap slower, and then it resets the loop. And we've got the legs moving, the tail moving around, and the head. So this is a pretty simple animation here, but it kind of does the job of what we're looking for. And so using the techniques we went over earlier, you can just see all the curves for everything. Or if we look at the dope sheet, you can see all the keyframes, and you can see how we've just adjusted the curves a little bit for these different movements. And so you can see how we kind of slowed down the curves at the end just to get the slower wing flapping movement towards the end and the subtle movement. So our next step is to basically write this out as an alembic. So I just dropped down a ROP, alembic ROP, if you guys don't know what that is. And this alembic ROP will let us just write out our asset. And so I just called it pigeon alembic ABC. And let's hit the pause button. So here it is. It just does frame 1 through 144. And we're just going to loop this and instance this onto a pop particle sim. And we're going to use the flock pops node to kind of get some bird flocking action so that they fly. And we're going to just adjust that in our scene itself once we get rolling. So anyways, yeah, so this is our pigeon asset. So this is pretty much done. It's good to go. And our next step will be to actually bring this into our other scene. So I'm going to actually go into the material, and we're going to copy this, and we're going to open up our scene, and we're going to paste this in. So I'm going to pause right now and open up our previous scene with our buildings and stuff, and I'll be right back. Alright, so now we're back in our scene we were building. I pasted in our pigeon shader, and we'll probably adjust this later as needed. And I actually worked on the scene layout a little bit more. I added another structure and another structure over here and over here, kind of did some tweaking, and I brought in some VDB clouds And there's nothing really special about the clouds. They're just, you guys could save this cloud shader. I use this shader that I built for clouds all the time, and I just make some subtle adjustments. But this is pretty much all there is to it. Nothing too special. And the density values are 0 to 1. Sometimes you guys, if depending on how you got the VDB or if you made the VDB, your minimum max values need to be adjusted. And actually there's this really neat technique. I don't think you could do this in other apps, but you can do this in Houdini, where if I open up a VDB and you want to know the density values that this VDB is actually using, because you can't tell really. If you just look at it, you're kind of just like, okay, there's density, but I have no idea what those values are. There's actually this volume slice, and so if you connect the volume slice tool in here, and we just connect it, and so it's affecting this VDB out here, and you map whatever you need. So let's say you needed emission, you could choose emission, but we're going to do density. So we're mapping the density group, and the attribute is density. Since these are clouds, they don't have emission, but if you wanted to know the min and the max of the emission, you would put that in here. And so now that we've got density as an attribute, if you come up to your geometry spreadsheet, you'll notice that we have the density in the points tab. And so if you click density, it'll tell you the highest value. And so these VDBs are actually already remapped to 0 to 1 space. But let's say they weren't, it would tell you here the max value. So then you could actually, in the shader, you could just type in old min, old max. So if, let's say, the max value here was like 40, then you could just type in 40 here, and that would give you the appropriate, correct remapped range from old min to new 0 to 1 space. So that's something to keep in mind, guys. That's a really useful thing if you're wondering why your VDBs look a little weird and you don't know what your min and max were in the past. Use the volume slice and read in that density attribute, and you could just tell right by organizing it from largest to smallest. You'll know the value range of your old density values. So anyways, something to keep in mind. But like I said, that's not a problem for our VDBs. They're already in 0 to 1 space. But I thought I'd share that with you guys in case you guys get VDBs that have different values, or you made them in the past, or you made them in another app and you don't know what your density values are. Cool. So I think for our next steps, we'll be maybe moving around clouds a little bit, and we're going to bring in our bird flock. And I think we're going to make it go from the right to the left. So maybe something like this in this angle. Not entirely sure yet. We'll figure that out. And to organize all this stuff, and actually let's should drop down a little organization thing here. Select these VDBs. And actually I could probably hide these VDBs so that the viewport remains a little lighter for now. So we'll just do bounding box. And let's just type in VDB clouds. We'll change the color to blue. And we'll slide this up. And so I started organizing my scene just to kind of make things easier to get around. So we've got our background structures, our foreground structures, our alembic stuff, and we've got trees. And so I haven't brought those trees in, but we're going to use the trees for our mat to get some detail on the cutout. And maybe we'll put some trees onto the building somewhere. I don't know if, we'll see if it ends up looking cool or not. So our next step is we need to bring in our bird. And so we're going to bring in the bird, and then we need a pop DOPNet to get that going. So let's drop down a file. And we'll just call this alembic pigeon. And let's move this over. Let's move it over here. And we'll dive into that node. We'll delete the file node. And we'll drop down an alembic. And we're going to load in our alembic bird. So here it is, pigeon. And as you can see, we've got our pigeon here. And if we scroll through, you can see how the wings are flapping. Now, our shot is only 140 or 150 frames. After frame 144, the animation stops on the bird. So let's say you had more frames and you wanted this alembic to loop forever. All you have to do is on the frame number, just type in click frame, and you'll see that it's just using the floating point frame expression. And so what you would do is you'd use the modulus, which is the percent sign, and however many frames your animation is. So this is 144. So you hit that, and that would loop infinitely your animation. So after frame 144, it starts moving again up. See? Now, we're not going to use this because we're going to end up modifying the frames using our point attributes when we scatter onto the pop net that's going to be pushing all the particles. But this is just something I want you guys to keep in mind. If you ever need to loop an alembic file, just remember FF or $FF, percent sign, or modulus 144, or in my case 144, however many frames your alembic file has, and that will just automatically loop your file infinitely. But we're not going to do that. We're going to use point attributes to randomly instance those points. So cool. Now we've got our little alembic pigeon going on here. So let's jump back out. And actually, let's make this a different color. Just make that green. So we know it's an alembic. And what we need to do is now we need to actually make something to scatter points and to simulate our points flying away. So we're going to hide our pigeon for now. We just imported it. And let's save our scene here. And so we're going to want to make these points flying this way. And so in order to do that, there's several ways you could do this. You could even use the shelf tool to kind of just get rolling, to get a start. And that usually can help. You could, there's, like I said, different ways you could do it, or you could build it manually. I try to keep things simple for you guys. So I'm gonna just use the shelf tool, so that way you guys can kind of use those as a base. So we're going to do that. So if you come up to the particles section, you'll notice we've got some options here. And what we want is a location particle emitter. This is like the most basic particle emission you could do. And so this will just drop down like a null empty point, and it'll emit particles. And actually, let's backtrack here. So if you see, if I press play, you'll see that it's emitting all these particles, right? So let's move that, because we don't want it to be that close to the camera. We want the distances to, kind of be realistic. So I'm going to make a guess and say that that's, far enough from our camera that's down here. And so let's look through our camera again. And yeah, I think that's a good enough distance. So right now, you'll notice that it automatically built the auto DOP network, the DOP net for us. So if we jump down, there's this DOP net here. And there should be another, there we go. And here's our location, our particles that are being basically generated. So these two new nodes, and we'll keep these together with our pigeon since they're going to be part of the same particle system. So our DOPNet is what's simulating our particles, and our location is the way our particles are being visualized, right? So if I hide this, you don't see anything. And inside of our DOPNet in here, this is basically what generates our particles. So the physics, the simulation data. So we have a couple nodes in here. They're really basic. We've got gravity, you know, the usual kind of stuff. And we have location. Right now, we're just using an infinite, imagine a null. It's an infinite point so that it's emitting from. We're not emitting from like a sphere or a plane or anything like that. And so what we want to do is actually emit from a plane. But first, we want to give this some direction so that it's not just falling. And right now, all we have gravity. And we want actually a force to push. So we want it to push from right to left. Now, using the shelf tool, it builds a couple nodes we're not going to need. So to keep things simple, we're going to get rid of some stuff. We don't need this merge. We're not going to merge in any other different pop solves. We don't need gravity because our birds are going to be just moving upwards, so we don't want them to constantly be fighting that force and coming down. So we're going to get rid of gravity. And or we could just leave it in case we do decide to use it, actually. So let's leave it, but we're going to just bypass it for now, just in case we want to use it later. And our output node, we could keep this. This just lets us cache out our sim. We'll use this in the end. So let's reset everything, and it should be going into our sim folder, and I'm not entirely sure if I made one. I did not. So let's actually go into our HIP and make a sim folder here. So new folder, sim, accept. I'll just hit cancel, and now we should be able to automatically go into there, so that should be fine. Cool. Okay, and let's save this. And now we don't really need this merge. I don't think we're going to combine another emitter, but we'll keep it for now. And we'll just move our solver down. And we'll move our pop object this way. And so our location is our infinite point that's emitting. And what we want to do is we want to have a force. So if you just start typing force, or pop force, actually, since that'll narrow it down, you'll see that we have our pop force node. And so anything that's got pop in it, that just means like the particle solver stuff, all the particles nodes. So we're going to drop that in here. And let's move this. Actually, let's move this a little bit up, just to give us some space to work with. And so our pop force here, what we want this to do is we want this to push our particles to have a force. And so there's several ways we could, adjust this and play around with it. Right now, our force direction, you can think of this as X, Y, and Z. So if I make this, let's just make this 5. And we hit play, you'll notice some action going on, but not much. Let's zoom in here. You can see the direction if we look at it from above. See that? So this is moving in what should be X. So we don't want it to move in this direction. Let's do 0 here. And let's try 5 this way. Okay, so we need negative Z. So let's do negative 5. and that's going to give us that direction, going left to right. And I'm not sure if I might want them to be coming towards the camera a little bit. So we're going to add a little bit of direction change towards us. So maybe 1. Let's just see what we get. Actually, I think that's the wrong way. I think it needs to be negative. Yeah. So negative. Alright. And maybe let's make that 2. I don't want it to be too steep towards us. So something like that. And so the number value that you type in here, you can think of as the strength of the force. So right now it's moving pretty fast, as you can tell. It's, you know, it's a lot in a couple frames. So we're probably going to tone this down. Let's try 3. One. All right, and we'll adjust the turbulence and all this stuff later. Right now we're just going to leave this at default. Cool. So we want this to also go up a little bit in Y. So let's actually increase the direction here in the Y space. So if we try 1, let's just see what happens. That's slightly angled. And so if we move this down here off camera, and we're going to probably need to roll the animation ahead of time, unless we decide to bake it out as an alembic and then we'll just move it into position. We'll see. But I think this is still a little too steep. So let's do negative 0.5. And we'll do 0.75. And let's see what we get. Okay, this is a little more acceptable. Okay, cool. So we'll deal with the pop force in a little bit with the turbulence. Now our next adjustment we need to work on is the way we're going to emit these particles. So right now, it's constantly creating particles per second. So the number is really high, 5,000. You could adjust this either using impulse activations or a constant birth rate. For our purposes, I think we're going to end up using impulse. And how impulse works is it emits however your impulse amount is per impulse launch, while constant birth rate just constantly creates particles. So we're going to probably just disable this completely. But before we move on to that, we need to use something else. We don't want to emit from a point. We want to emit from a surface. So we're going to use some geometry to emit from. And that'll just make things a little easier here for us. So let's jump back out. And we're going to drop down a grid. And we're just going to call this emission grid. And you'll see this plane here. Let's hit the M key, rotate it around. So something like that. And let's just move it this way. So move it back out here. And so let's dive back into our .NET. And so instead of using a null or an infinite point to emit from, we're going to now emit from an object. And so if you type pop source, you get this node that lets you connect geometry, like a plane or something like that, to emit from the particles from the surface. So we're going to do that. So we're going to plug this in here. And under our SOP, we're going to look for our grid we just made. So object in the G's. Where were we? Oh, there it is. Emission grid. You'll notice now that it's emitting from the surface. So if I backtrack and press play now, you'll see that it's emitting across the entire surface. Now this is way too many points. Obviously we don't want, you know, whatever, thousands of birds. So we're going to tone this down, and actually we're going to do something like 0. I don't want a constant birth rate. We're probably going to keyframe the birth rate using impulse activation. And so the impulse count is how many per impulse to generate. So if I type in 5 and we press play, it's going to generate in sets of 5 our points. So what we could do is activate the impulse activation. 1 means on, 0 means off. So what we're going to do is animate our keyframe on, off, on, off, on, off. So it kind of generates spacing between the birds. So it's not all just one constant stream. So let's keyframe the beginning here. And we might need to pre-roll this, like I mentioned. And we could just write this out eventually as an alembic and move it into position and stuff and have it play a little early. But we'll see what we end up doing. And so maybe by frame 5, we'll do off. And so if I were to just show you what it's doing, is it emitted, and that was it. One group. See? And we're going to actually do this a few times. And we'll probably end up adjusting the keyframes, stuff like that, you know, to kind of just tweak the values and see what we end up being happy with. Turn it back on. We'll make this 0. Drag that keyframe. We'll make this 1 again. And we'll make this 0. Keyframe. And so let's see what we get. And that was way too quick. So let's space this out. Just to see what we get. And so it should be off, on again, off again, and so on. And that probably needs a little more spacing than that still. So let's just do this. Alright, and so this is still too many particles. Let's try 4. That's still generating way too many. But whatever, cool. So this is just a start. So now what we need to do is we need to actually drop down the flock node. So if you type in pop flock, this gives you a node that's designed to kind of simulate the movement of birds or fish, stuff like that, the flocking movement basically. And it kind of has attraction points, so it attracts to each other, and it just does a lot of neat neat little features here. So if we press play, we get to see what it does. So you see how they kind of now attract and spread. Cool. And I think we're going to have to pre-roll the simulation quite a lot. But we'll see. We'll see how things turn out. And, you know, you can make adjustments here, like the how much they avoid, how many centers. So if I were to type in 3, that's like the centers of where they attract to. We might not be able to see it since there's not enough. Oh, yeah, there we go. See that? Towards the end. They cluster into 3 groups. And so that's based on the centers system. So we might just use 1. And the distance that things separate, how much they avoid each other. So that you could keep this avoid number pretty low. Like, let's just do 3. And they'll stay pretty close to each other without having to kind of not worry about crashing into each other, I suppose you could say. And the max distance, we're going to try 0.4. And we'll keep this at 10 for now. Cool. And actually, let's disable the constant activation. There we go. Because it was birthing points constantly, and we don't want that. We want it to only make them on our keyframes. So now you can see that the birth rate is a little more scattered. So it's like a couple birds here, a couple birds there. So this looks a little more natural for what I'm looking for. I don't want like a swarm of birds. I just want a couple here and there, you know. Okay. Let's adjust the force. I think they're moving a little too fast. For my taste, I think we could do... Let's do -2. Okay, yeah, this is a little better. And we'll work on the keyframes later just to kind of get the right amount that we want. And we'll relocate this sheet, this grid. So let's go back in here and click on our grid. And I actually want the grid to be wider, so there's more room to spawn horizontally rather than vertically. And we'll locate this off camera. So let's move this. Let's hit the M key here. Move this a little further out. Let's rotate it just a bit this way. And we need it to be off camera, so let's move it right. Well, let's move it down first. And let's just see what happens when we hit play. And we don't see anything. So it looks like they're not spawning fast enough. And we might need to move them a little closer to the camera. Might not. Let's see. Let's come into our DOPNet. Let's try 3. Okay, there we go. They started to come in towards the last frame. Let's try a little more speed. Or actually, no, let's see if we can get the emission grid a little closer. Right there. So we might need to emit sooner than originally planned. But that's okay. I mean, if we get the layout kind of looking good, even though we can ignore the background, and we could just cache that out at certain frames where we like the movement already. So that's fine. Yeah, that's what I think we'll end up doing. So if we were to check this at frame, I don't know, let's just see frame 200. Something like this. So we'll give it a couple more bursts to kind of get it going. So I'm going to pause for a second, and then we'll work on loading up the pigeon once I'm happy with the movement of our points going across the sky here. Since this could take a long time, me just adjusting the keyframes when they emit and the location of the plane and all that stuff. So I don't want you guys to get bored with all that. So I'm just going to pause it for a second while I tweak that. And actually, before we do that, if you guys are just wondering what it looks like right now, if we just hit the render button. This is what we've got. So our clouds look pretty cool. And I think there's motion blur actually. Or no, the resolution's just low. Let me check. Oh yeah, there is motion blur. And the background, that's why the background's blurred. We're not going to have motion blur in the end. So here we've got our other little structure. To get more detail in here, we're going to use the trees and scatter them on our mat. And then maybe I'll do something similar right here. But I think the composition of the clouds is cool. Kind of pulls you in. And if you check out the alpha, this is what we've got. So we still need to work on these edges using the trees that we brought in. But overall, it's the shot's coming together now with more assets and stuff. And so in motion, once we get these birds flying in here, it'll be pretty cool. And the atmosphere, I know, isn't right for this, but we're going to do that in Nuke and add just that haze on top of this so we don't have to deal with it. And actually put an atmosphere on everything. We might not. I don't know. We'll see how we approach it in the end. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's move on to tweaking that bird flocking by. So let's save here. And I'll be back. Hey guys, I actually just realized that I forgot to show you guys how to pre-roll your simulation. Now, normally under normal circumstances, you don't want to do it necessarily this way. This is kind of, I mean, you could do it this way, but it's normally you don't want to have negative frames when doing simulations, just because it can lead to issues sometimes. But you know, we're just gonna pre-roll this a little bit. The simulation isn't that important of an aspect, but just so you guys keep in mind, typically this is why you want your file frames to be above 1,000. So usually people start at frame 1001 and then work forward. That way you have enough buffer 1,000 frames behind that in case you need to pre-roll your simulation, you can do it. Since we're not going to be able to do that because our Alembic camera would have to be time shifted, and I mean, I guess we could do it, but it just requires us having to time shift our camera forward, and we'd have to rebake out our background in order to do it. There's two ways we could do this. So we could do it I guess, like I said, they're both correct. Just one is a little more correct. And one way is to do it the cheap way with negative frames. So we're going to do it with negative frames right now. I'm going to show you guys. So in case you can't, for some reason you can't write out your files anymore. So you can write out a pre-roll by first making our frames go back into negative space. So let's do negative 100. And so now we've got 100 extra frames back here. And if we click on our DOPNet, the start frame, we're going to start it at negative 100. Now that we've got our DOPNet selected. And you'll see that we've got something going on here already. And let's actually only show from frame 1 onward. And you'll notice, there you go. We've got our pre-rolled frames. And so that gives us our simulation a little early. And like I said, technically this isn't correct. Because you won't want to have negative frames. And so if we were to come in here and adjust our dope sheet, select our frames here, and just drag those back to further back into the negative space, just see what we get. We've got this. And so we could keyframe into negative space our values. And so that's just a way you could pre-roll your simulation using negative frames. Now, like I said, you guys, typically what you should do is time shift your camera. So our Alembic camera, we'd come in here and we would have to time shift everything. But that means we would have to do it in Nuke and output our rendered background using the new frame numbers. So frame 1001, 1002, 1003 instead of 1, 2, 3, and so on. So honestly, that's just too much work for this project. There's no point in really doing that if we could just solve our problem by just using 100 negative frames, right? So that's what we're going to do. And that gives us an appropriate amount of pre-roll to get our little scatter going. So now I do need to come in here and let's check out our frames. Oops. Come in here and check out our DOPNet, and now let's actually delete this. And now we could adjust our impulse activation on off keyframes here to just adjust things and see how they go. And actually, let's move this back to frame 100. Or 99. And so we don't actually need to see the pre-roll. But once it kicks in, there we go. We've got our points. And so I think we're just going to come in here and let's open up our animation editor. And we'll probably just duplicate these points here. And I think that'll probably work well for our purposes. If we just copy this. Oops. And we come in here and go to, I don't know, frame 130, and we'll just paste special, cycle at region, and we'll see what that gives us. So if we come down here, and let's only visualize from frame 1 onward, or actually, yeah. We've got our little points scattered here, moving around. And yeah, cool. So that's how we're gonna do this. Now, technically, is that correct? Not necessarily, but you know, it solves our problem where we needed some negative pre-roll to have our bird movements. All right, cool. So now I'm gonna just, like I said, adjust these keyframes for our time step, and just to get a good idea of kind of what we're trying to achieve here. And once we're happy adjusting those keyframes and seeing how the simulation looks, we'll move on to instancing our alembic pigeon onto these points so that they're flapping at different time frames and moving together. All right, cool. So I'm going to pause this and I'll be back once I'm done adjusting the particle sim. Alright guys, now that I'm back after playing around with our particle simulation a little bit and pre-rolling it 150 frame, negative 150 frames, this is the result we've got. So we've got a couple points here, and if we hit play, we've got these points kind of moving across the sky. Not too fast, not too slow. I think this will look okay. So now that I'm feeling pretty satisfied with the point positions, and I might change this later, you know, that's the great thing about Houdini. It's all procedural, so we can make adjustments if needed. But for our next step, we need to come in here and actually instance our alembic bird, our pigeon. Now, there is a downside to this, and the downside, a lot of people actually don't know that this happens. Instancing in Redshift, and actually pretty much every engine, unless you're using a special procedural, a render time procedural, if an object at SOP level has any edits, so like our wings flapping on our bird, these edits actually have frame by frame cannot be instanced. So let's say, you know, all these points, we have our bird instanced, and we offset the time. So one has the wings flapping open, another one has the wings flapping down, whatever. Those points will not be considered instanced because the animation of the object. So they will be unique. That is a downside. The only kind of a way around this is if you wrote the frames to disk, and then if your points have overlapping frames of your animation. So let's say this point has the wings completely open and this point has the wings completely open, then Redshift will automatically detect from the file on disk that these 2 points are sharing the same exact moment of our animation and will be considered instances, while the other points might not be because the frame in our animation isn't overlapping. So what does that mean for us? It means that chances are this isn't going to instance and they're going to be completely unique, because we only have, I don't know, maybe like 30 points or something, 20 points here. And the odds of our animation that was 144 frames for the wings to flap, that any of these points are going to be on the exact same moment, on the exact same frame is, pretty slim. Odds are that isn't going to happen, and thus all these points are going to be considered unique geometry. So that is a downside to instancing objects that have deformations. They don't actually get considered instances unless the points are sharing the exact same frame at that exact same moment. So something to keep in mind, guys. So that's why odds are the points aren't going to sync up. So I'm not going to bother doing it with the file cache points method, and I'm just going to use the Alembic method, since, like I said, we're not actually going to be instancing. So, yeah. So let's just get the pigeon Alembic and bring that in and have it on these points. So, first steps first, we're going to object merge our pigeon into our location particles, since we're going to be stamping onto these. So let's do an object merge. And we're going to pull in our pigeon. Where is it? Alembic pigeon. And actually, just to save on nodes, we're going to just cut this out. This will be easier. And we're going to just paste it in here directly. And we'll just get rid of this node. Alembic pigeon scatter. We'll just call it that. Okay, cool. And let's zoom out. Let's move this up a little bit. Give us a little more room. Okay, so let's jump in here. And so here we've got our points. And so we need to scatter onto these points our Alembic pigeon that we've got here. So first of all, we're going to need to shade our Alembic pigeon. So under the primitive groups, we're going to just use group name node full file path, and that should, if we middle mouse click it, provide us a pigeon material. So if we drop down a material and plug this in, load up our material, our pigeon material. I just copy and pasted it into the scene. There we go. We've got our pigeon with the shader, and that should be okay for now. And we might make adjustments to randomize, maybe using user data, the shade or the color. I don't know. We'll figure that out later. And so now we need to get this pigeon onto these points that we've got over here. So in order to do that, we need to actually do a little bit of wrangling, and we're going to need to do also some copying to points. So before we get to the wrangling, let's just copy to points. So if you do a copy to points, and actually, why am I getting an error here? Parameter, texture, sample, scale, and parameter, map, pigeon, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Oh yeah, that's just due to the automatic pulling in of the shader. We don't have to worry about that. So with our copy to points node, we need to connect our points, and we need to connect our object. So if we highlight this, there we go. We've got our pigeons, and they're huge. in our scene. So we're going to have to change the scale. And I don't think they're animated at all. Or if they are, the wings are flapping simultaneously. Yeah, so you can see they're animating, but they're moving all at the same time. So we need to offset them. So right now, technically, this would be instanced because the frame flap on all these wings is at the same location. So it's used, but once we offset the time, they no longer become instances. They become unique geometry due to having different frames where the geometry is deforming differently. So let's come back in here and let's do a transform. So let's change the size of our pigeon. And we actually need to rotate this also. So let's do a 180. And that rotated the direction. Okay. And let's decrease the scale. I don't want them too small because I kind of want to see if the wings are flapping. So this will be, we'll make them smaller later, but I think this is an okay size. It's just to see what's going on. Okay, cool. Let's bring this down a little more. Now, we want to add a little randomization here. So let's do a random attribute randomize. And so this is the usual stuff that you guys have seen in my other tutorials where we randomize the scale. So we're just going to drop down a P scale, and our minimum value we're going to do, I don't know, 0.8, and our maximum, let's just do 1.2. So there's a little variation in the scale. Let's see what we've got here. And we're going to probably need to rotate this around some more. But let's actually do another randomize. Let's see if we can randomize the up. Let's come in here and type in up. And let's see if we can do 180. Okay, let's try negative 180. That's too much. So we'll try to adjust this until we get, a value we like. So let's try 90. It's still too much. Negative 90. Nope. Negative 30. 30. Let's do 0 here. 0 here. 0 there. And now it's going just way too wild. So let's try 0. And if we zero everything out, those values are too much. So let's try 0 here. And zero. Let's keep it like that. So that way we've got a little bit of rotation, or yaw, I guess you could say. So it's going a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a couple of these. But now the only problem is that the wings are flapping at the same moment, so we need to offset the animation. So let's go back into our camera view. And at this point is where we're going to need to actually drop some wrangles down. So let's hit that and move this down. And so we're going to need an attribute wrangle. So let's start typing attribute, or actually wrangle. And we're going to plug this in. And we need this to run over points, since this is a point. What we're editing is our points, our attributes and our points. And what we need to do is create a new attribute that we're going to just call time. We can name this whatever you want, you know, but we're going to just call this time, since that's what we're going to have this modifying, the time of our points. So let's just say we're going to type in F because it's a float value, the at for attribute, and type in time, and we're going to hit equal. So we're creating a new attribute called time. And so actually, well, it's going to error out right now, but this new attribute, we want it to be randomized, but we don't want it to just be any random number. We want it to be a random number between 1 and 144, because our animation for our bird is 144 frames long. So how do we do that? So first step is we're going to type in rand. That will generate a random number. But what will our seed be? Our seed, I think, would be the ID number, would be best if it was the ID number of each point. So each point, if we go into, if we select one of these nodes, you'll notice that we have right now 0 to 39. This is the ID that's uniquely assigned to our particles. And so even if the particle dies or fades away after the life ends, this unique number is forever on that particle assigned. So we want a number that isn't going to change, so that once that number gets assigned, it's assigned. So we're going to use that attribute, and that attribute gets created when you use pop simulation automatically. So we're pulling that from our simulation, right? So each one of these points has an ID. So what we're going to use is that ID. So attribute ID. And let's just close this so you guys can see what it's doing. So if we middle mouse click this and we look, we should have this new attribute time. So if we come over here, geometry spreadsheet again, we should be seeing time somewhere around here. There it is. So now we've got time. So it's randomly creating a value between 0 to 1. But the problem is we need a value between 1 and 144, since we have 144 frames. So how can we continue to edit this to add more of that number? Well, an easy way is to just multiply this by 144. And so now we've got values between 60, we've got 60, 0.42, 117, 37, all these numbers, right? Between now 144. But the problem is we can't use float numbers, because our alembic animation and our frames are using full integer values. So we need to actually convert this, and we need to have it select only one of those integer values. So as you can see, if we go back to the beginning, we have less points, and then points get created in groups of 4 because of the way that they were being generated. And so these time values get assigned to it. And so the problem is that our animation is 44 frames per second also. So what we need to do is we're going to add our current frame value. So, well, it broke right now because I scrolled. But so let's say we're on frame 60. We're going to add frame 60 to this value, And so frame is a intrinsic attribute inside of Houdini with Vex that's global. So we're going to use frame. And let's close this. So what's happening now is we're getting a random number that's seeded by our ID. We're multiplying this 0 to 1 with 144, and we're going to add whatever frame we're at to it. And the reason is because we have an animation. So every frame forward, we want it to animate, basically, going forward, right? And so from this point, to keep the loop inside of 144, we need to use a modulus, which is the percent sign. And that's going to be the same number as we have animation. So we have 144 frames of animation. And this is going to keep our values inside of 144 and looping constantly for us. And so if we look at the time, and actually I should just filter out some of these so that way we don't see all this stuff. So go up to, just hide everything, and we're going to just show, where is it at, time, and ID for now. And so if we scroll through here, you'll notice that we've got all these values inside of time being generated, and they're all between 1 and 144. And so this created our attribute time. Now, time needs to be divided by 24. And the reason is, like I said, we're doing 24 frames per second. And that's just going to give us different integer values here, or float values, I should say, that are 1 through 4, roughly, or 1 through 5. Now, we could use a different number if we wanted to start this and stop it at different rates, so it's even further randomized. But I kind of want things to be flapping in a similar, well, we'll see. We might adjust this. We might not even use this. We'll see how the result is. So at this point, if we middle mouse click, we've now got our time attribute. So how are we going to use this time attribute? We need to actually have it brought into our points. So inside of our copy to points, we need time to also be one of the attributes that gets added. So if we drop a comma and type in time, this will carry our attribute over to our points. So if we middle mouse click, again, we've got time as one of the attributes that's being brought over. So let's move back to scene view. And the flapping is still the same. And the reason why that is because we still haven't told how to use this time value with our alembic. So if you come into our alembic file, you'll notice that the way it works is just using frame FF. So whatever frame it's on, that's what it does. You know, it just intrinsically uses that. And we actually need to set the intrinsic frame value to something else. And we want that to be edited with our time value, which is what we created up here. So let's drop down another wrangle. And like I said, guys, there's several ways you could do this. This is just one way. And we come into this wrangle here. And so what we need is we need to set the primitive intrinsic value. And so this is a primitive, our alembic file. It's a primitive. It's a whole object, not a point that we're editing here. Right? And what we need that to be set to is, and actually, let me pull up what this means so you guys could see what it means exactly in the Houdini help. So if you just quickly Google search the just set prim intrinsic and Houdini, you'll get the vex functions, and so you'll get all the information of what this does and how it works and stuff. And it's an integer and whatnot, right? And so it pretty much tells you the attributes that are writable, that are intrinsic onto a primitive, which is what our alembic file is. It's a primitive object, right? And there's a couple different options here and whatnot. Now, the intrinsic attribute we're actually editing is on an alembic. It's called ABC frame, which is short for alembic frame. That's what we're modifying. So we're modifying the alembic frame value, which is what this is up here. This is the alembic frame. So you can see right here in the little help, it says right there, the alembic frame at which is to sample the geometry, right? And so this is the parameter we're modifying down here, right? Now, in order to find that, you could just come in here, and if you searched the alembic SOP, you would see at the bottom, or well, yeah, let's just do that so you could see alembic Houdini. You would see all the options in here, and at the bottom there should be the intrinsic. Yeah, here we go. All intrinsic attributes and stuff like that here, right? Will be created regardless of a point attribute. Point attributes. Where is it at? Should be, that information should be here somewhere, but regardless, that's how it works. That all alembic files come in with an intrinsic attribute built in, and one of those is ABC frame. And so that's what we're modifying here with the set primitive intrinsic. So if you type in ABC frame, that's what we're modifying. And we're going to modify it. There's different ways we could do it. We're going to do it by primnum, which is primitive number, and our time attribute that we just created. So let's close this up and see what happens. And there we go. It should, yeah, now we've got our flapping at different frames. Cool. And so, you guys can check out what this is doing and search, these terms on your own inside of the Houdini help, and you'll kind of get all that information. Oh, here it is, the intrinsic value. So alembic primitive geometry node, here it is, the local values that it comes with is ABC frame, the frame value for the current alembic primitive, right? And so that's exactly what we're modifying here while using the set primitive intrinsic. And so that's how we are getting now this value randomized. And so what it's doing is, if you look at this, it's the geo handle integer, comma, The geo handle 0. I mean, it doesn't really matter. It's irrelevant. The string name of what we're editing, which is ABC frame, right? The number, the integer number, well, we want to edit all of the points, so prim num, whatever point it's at, that's the one that we're editing. And then the value that we're changing or adjusting. And in this case, we're adjusting time. And we're using that to adjust the ABC frame. So this value is basically feeding this value here. Yeah. And we could come back in here and make adjustments if we want. We could divide by nothing. Let's just see what it does. We'll probably get wilder numbers. Let's do // and why did it not? Oh, there we go. Sorry, used to the / wrong direction. So there we go. It's commented. So now we've got values going, I believe, all over the place. Oh no, there we go. It froze. And that's due to the frame rate here not being 24. See? And this gives us more appropriate numbers. We could try a different division. Let's try 30. Let's just see what we get. And we could tweak these values all day, you know, however we feel like it. We'll just keep it at 24 for now. Let's come in here and adjust our scale. Let's do 1.5. So this is a little closer to the size we might use. We might even do 0.1. And let's rewind. Let's hit play. Actually, let's do a play blast and see how this looks. So let's save our progress here. And let's do a quick little flip book. And I'll pause this while that renders out. All right, here we are. I'm back. Just a quick little play blast just to see how things are moving around. I think we could actually straighten them out. I think they might be rotating a little too much in some areas, and they might be clumped up a little too much. So I'll make some adjustments, maybe decrease the scale a little bit, and I think the shader might be too dark, so I'll lighten up the shader. But overall, I think, you know, this is close enough. It's getting us to where we need. Have a couple we got our birds flapping at different times. Some are just soaring. A little randomization going on. So with motion blur, this might actually look okay. Let's close that. Oh, and I forgot that we needed to do a %144 here so that this would loop also our original Alembic file. And yeah, I think this is okay. Let's just come in here and make some adjustments. I think let's hide our up. Let's see what we get. Right now they're leaning too much that way. I think our P scale randomization is okay. I think we could maybe go a little bit smaller. So let's try 0.8. Oops. 0.8. 0.08. And let's actually rotate this a little bit. That's too far. Actually, I don't even know which direction this is rotating. Let's check this. This might be a little better since they're kind of coming towards us. So they'll be rotating just a bit more in our direction. And let's just see what happens if I disable this. You know what? I think we'll kill the up vector. We'll get rid of that. I don't think we need it. Let's look back through. Yeah, I think this looks a little better. The direction. And we might make them even smaller than this. Let's come into our materials. Let's adjust our pigeon. And let's do a color correct. Or maybe we could do it on the shader itself. Let's see here. Color offset. No, we'll do a color correct. We'll plug that in for now. And actually, let's see what this looks like rendered, and we'll adjust it in IPR. So let's save. Let's open up the render view. And see what we get. And I probably should cache out the particles once I'm happy with the way they're moving, all the points. Whoa. So I'll test that out in a second. And this is a decent amount of unique geometry, so this might act up a little. But let's see. I'm going to... Oh, doesn't look like our alembic points made it. So let's pause this. And what happened? Our objects. Oh, they're hidden. There we go. Give this a second. Because I hid the alembic point scatter. So let me pause this in case it crashes. Okay, it did not crash. I just had to wait a little bit. Bad parameter from the normal map. Let's come in here. Is this our normal? I'm going to just delete this. Oops. Texture. Just so we don't get that error. I don't need the normal map in viewport anyways. So that's fine. And we'll paste that back in. Parameter map pigeon. And I I guess it's the parameter here that's having issues. We're just going to disable them. Maybe that'll fix it. Huh. Well, it's not liking that, but I don't think this should cause a problem. It's just the OpenGL. So let's hit IPR and see what we get. And actually, I should turn on motion blur. And it looks like our birds are not shaded. They look black. So I'll have to check that next. But let's first come in here and check out our motion blur. Let's see if that looks okay. We need to turn on particle and deformation blur, since these are moving and they're particles. Let's reload and make sure we're using the Alembic camera. And I think the motion blur is active, but let's test out a higher blur count. Let's just do 20. So that should make everything pretty blurry. So our structure does look motion blurred. The background's motion blurred. Hard to tell if our objects are motion blurring also. So let's come in here, go to the object, the redshift object tag, make sure compute vertex from UV. Yep, enable deformation. So deformation is. I don't think there's a velocity, but let's see. Oh, there is velocity on the points. Shouldn't matter too much though. It doesn't look like it's updating as I roll the particles when I move around. There's an option for that in the IPR, but it does make things slower. Okay, cool. So I think the layout is okay. I need to get the shader now working on the Alembic file, because for some reason it is not appearing like it should. So I'm going to pause for a little bit and I'll be right back. Hey guys, so the shader actually was working. It's just it was really dark, so it looked black. So I came in here and just adjusted the gamma and did some hue shifting. So if we rotate around, you can see that the pigeons look okay now. Another thing, the motion blur, the reason, this is a silly mistake, but this happens to me and everybody all the time, is I forgot and left motion vector AOV enabled, and so that disables the IPR motion blur, and so I thought that it was still on, but it wasn't. So really simple mistake. So guys, if you're wondering what's going on, why there's no motion blur, try to remember to check your AOVs and make sure you don't have motion vectors enabled. And so yeah, that silly mistake happened to me right now. Cool. So if we rotate now back into view, let's just switch over to our Alembic camera. Here we go. We've got Now our scene, we've got a little bit of motion blur. We've got our pigeons here doing their thing, flying by. And actually under IPR, let's do live updates of instances, proxies, and all that. Check this on. And so if we scroll through, it should update our positions. Yeah, there we go. Cool. And actually, why is our camera not following correctly? Let's switch over to, it's not looking through our limbic camera, which is weird. It's like it's stuck. So let's pause that. Come back up here. Some reason let's load. Let's actually check this out. Camera moving okay. And let's just do a final test render here. We'll do a 200%, and let's just do a test render. Now while that renders, I'm going to think about our next steps. I think we're already nearing 3 hours for this part 2, so we're likely to move on to part 3 next. And we'll probably be having to adjust our shader on our pigeon, I should say. Our clouds are looking okay. Structure's cool. Our pigeons, I think, are too big. And we'll have to be making some adjustments on those guys there. And we need to instance our trees onto this surface to give us a cutout. So I think we'll do that real quickly, and I'll just be adjusting the shader on the pigeon off camera, because I mean, you guys don't really need to see me doing that. And I might do well, I think the shader's okay. I don't need to randomize it. I might not. I don't think I need to. So what we need to do is make our matte edges a little nicer here. And after that, we'll do a couple frame renders and send them into Nuke. And like I said, I'm not going to really show you guys that part while I adjust these things, because it's not really necessary. If we check this out by rotating it, I think, you know, this is starting to come together. It's a nice little composition, pulling in the eye and stuff. And it'll look pretty cool once it's all animated. Let's decrease this to 100%. So to conclude this part 2, I think we're going to just quickly add those trees down here, and I'll be adjusting the shaders on the birds myself off camera. So let's come in here, and we're going to just use the shrub. I think summer shrub should be okay, and we're getting errors, and that's because I did not put these into the right location. So I'm going to pause and copy the trees that we need. So I just pasted the folder, and we need to do geo, hit enter, and there we go. That should give us a little tree here. And let me actually check out the shapes of our other trees. Let's reload. And why is this not reloading? Oh, this needs also geo/enter. Let's come in here. Geo/enter. /geo. Geo / okay, cool. So we're gonna just use, I don't know, one of these. Let's just go with the summer. Doesn't really matter since we're just using it as a mat. And we're gonna come over here to our ocean mat. Or actually no, our mat shapes. I'm gonna jump in here. And actually we need to drop down a null. We'll call this out, mat out. And actually let's select that. And we're going to drop down an instance sop. And we'll call this tree mat. Jump in here, object merge our null, our mat out. And we need to actually copy the transforms. So let's just copy parameter, paste relative reference. And it did not copy that over, which is strange. Enable merge. Yep. There we go. Into this object. Actually, let's see if I can delete this. I guess we could keep it so it'll follow. All right, and let's jump in here. Let's zoom in on this thing. Let's scatter some points on it. And let's blast the points. We don't need the points on the lower half. So let's select our blast points. And let's just choose, I don't know, that. And let's invert that. Actually, there we go. Why did it not hook in there? That's weird. Let's only select the top to points. Let's do something like that. So now we've only got the top points here. And we're in an instance. Make sure our instancing is activated. Yep. We use Redshift point clouds. And the instance object we want is our, we'll just do the shrub summer. We could try different shapes if we need to. Where is it? Small chemise shrub summer. Let's just try that. Let's see if we got full point instancing. Those look way too big. So let's jump in here and do an attribute randomize. Select that. Actually, let's go up and pin this, and then jump in here and do a P scale. Let's look through our camera. And that's probably too big. So we'll shrink that down. Maybe 0.2. And let's jump back up. Let's go into our matte options. And we're going to enable our matte. And what did we have it set as? Show background, alpha 0. Oh, that's right. We need an alpha 0. Since we don't want an alpha. So let's save this. And let's test out a test render real quick. And see how that looks. Let's just do a full render. So I'll pause this for a second so you guys don't have to wait. Alright, so here we are. If we come in here and zoom in, you can see that the shapes are a little better. This is how it used to be before. The shapes are a little rougher. And now we kind of get a little nicer organic breakup. The only problem is that we cut into it too much right here in this area. So I'm going to lower the geometry here, which should lower the points and should give us a nice little result. And for the next step, I think we'll also scatter some trees on a surface back here just to kind of break these shapes up a little bit so it's not perfectly flat. I think that'll help give us a little imperfections. So yeah, I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna do that and keep adjusting the shaders on our birds and tweaking maybe the simulation. Maybe have less, more, I don't know. I'll be making adjustments there. And yeah, I'll be back. Once I'm happy with all that, I'll be making a render. We'll take it into Nuke real quick just to see how it looks overall. And that'll be the end of part 2. And for part 3, we'll continue to edit the shot, adding more details onto our structures probably, and maybe some smoke, pyro sim coming out the top or back here or something, some steam. Alright, so I'll be back. Alright guys, so I worked on the shape here a little bit for our mat with our trees scattered on top. I made one for this building off in the distance to kind of give us a little cutout also. And I think for now, we're good to send off a render. So we're going to end up using motion vectors in comp. I think it'll work okay with the birds. We don't really need to bake in the motion blur. I think it'll look fine, and you know, it's just extra render time that we're going to be making. So let's jump into our Redshift ROP. Let's make sure that our motion vectors are on. And now one more thing I want to do is I actually want to have some masks so we could edit the structures a little in Nuke. Maybe add a little haze to these buildings back here that are further away with some grading. And so in order to do this, I'm going to actually make a puzzle mat, a couple puzzle mats. Now I know I could do this with CryptoMat and it would automatically build it for me. But the thing about CryptoMat is it uses deep data. And so that takes a little bit longer to actually render when you're using a deep scene. And so I personally would rather not do it that way. So what I'm going to do is just use puzzle mats, since it'll render overall faster instead of having to write out the deep data for this scene. Let's do, let's see, just 1 building, 2 building, 3, 4, 5. So we need 5. We'll just do 6. So that gives us 2 puzzle mats, since you can have 3 on each puzzle mat. So let's add 2 more AOVs. Come down here, switch this over to puzzle mat. We'll call this puzzle mat 1. and puzzle mat 2. And for our puzzle mat type, we want this to be object. So we're going to switch over to object ID. We'll have this as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And actually, no, let's keep these as full numbers. So we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, cool. Now, for our next step, we'll come in here. And actually, no, I think we have an extra building. So I don't think I'm going to really need it for the foreground, but we'll see. So let's jump into the objects real quick. And let's select our structures. So we've got this structure back here. We're going to have this as object ID 1. Object ID. Actually, I think this one looks pretty good. So I might not need that one. This one back here, we'll make this object ID 2. Object ID 3. 4. And no, we'll add one for the building in the background. So let's do this as 5, and the birds, which are, where are they? Trees, BDB clouds. Oh, they're over here. And we'll make this where is it? Huh. There is no, oh, there we go. Object ID 6. So the bird should be their own. Everything should have a mat except for this structure. I don't think I'm going to need it, but I don't know. We'll see. You know what? We'll just add one. Why not? Just so we have full coverage. Puzzle mat. Again, puzzle mat 3. And we'll just do all of these 7 so that it's just white. And we'll make our main building 7. Okay, cool. So I'm going to render this now, and let's make our camera 4K. Let's make sure. Oops, wrong camera. Our Alembic camera. And indeed, it is 4K. So let's just hide the visibility, since we don't need to be able to see these. We'll just make these bounding boxes. And I think for now, that should be good enough. And we're going to render this out and take it into Nuke. So I'm going to pause. And let's actually save our scene. I'm going to pause this, and we're going to render just this one frame and just take it into Nuke and see how it looks with our original backplate composite and see what result we get. So I'll be back. All right, so this took only 1 minute and 30 seconds to render at 4K, which is pretty good. If we zoom in here, we've got these little cutouts now. I might need to edit this little corner here, but it's not really anything major, so I might do that. And we've got our birds. Our birds look nicer now. I adjusted the shader. I think I'm going to use some user data to randomize a couple of the birds to give them a little, I don't know, maybe a little darker, since right now they all look the same. Another thing that we're going to I worked on was back here. You can see that I cut out the shape a little better. Cool. So that is our render. Not bad for 1 minute. And if we check out our velocity, we've got our movement as expected, and our puzzle mats. So here we go. And so I'll be using these puzzle mats to help grade the buildings back here. Since right now they don't have any haze, which is what they need for some adjustments. But I think overall, you know, this is starting to come together as a pretty nice shot. Obviously, we still need imperfections on our shaders. Right now, it's just flat, perfectly smooth shading. So we could either do that texture painting and just use an automatic UV unwrapping, or we could use a projection in Nuke. I'm not sure which approach we'll take yet. And that'll probably be part 3, the final little details. But I think overall the shot's looking pretty good, especially if we're going to be seeing this at 1080p or 2K. Cool. So let's save this out and bring this into Nuke and see what we can, you know, what our shot results as. So I'll pause this again. All right, here we are inside of Nuke, and we've read in our shot. And if we zoom in here, this is using the same setup that we had last tutorial. So it's just running it through the grades, adding a little bit of noise. If we zoom in here, might need a little more noise. And we've got our vector blur that we could adjust here. So if we want more motion blur, maybe this isn't enough. Maybe we need 1. Maybe more. I think that might be too much. But you can see that the motion blur worked on everything as expected. Alright, so yeah, it looks okay. I think this might be a pretty good amount. Maybe too much motion blur, a little less. Try 1.75. Might need a little more grain, but cool. So let's actually isolate some of our grading here, and we could do that right before our vector blur, or we could actually split it off and merge it back in. We'll see. Let's drop down a Gia grade. Oops. And for our channels, let's actually check where our, let's connect back in here. Where's our grade? Where our puzzle mat is. So this is red and green. So we're going to work on this building first. And we could merge, we could actually shuffle them together so we could edit them both at the same time. But actually, you know what? Let's do that. Let's do a shuffle. I should probably move this down so we have a little more working space. And where were we? Right here. Let's plug in our shuffle. And let's shuffle our puzzle mat 1. Puzzle mat 1. And we're going to basically just combine our green or our red together. So we could just do this. And that should work. Let's see. Back into our puzzle mat 1. And it did not. What's going on here? Actually, no, we won't use a shuffle. We could use a channel merge. Let's drop that down. And I'm sure there's another way to do this, but I'm thinking of a channel merge. Move this down. connect it to the same source, and we want to mix in, actually what's going on here, switch over to RGB, and we want puzzle mat 1 red and channel B to be puzzle mat green, which is that building, and we want it to output. We could add it to a new output, we could call it something else, but we'll just call it puzzle mat red, so they'll merge. And the operation is a union, so if I check the red, actually no, I think shuffle was doing the same thing, so maybe I was right. Let's just test out my theory real quick. Oh no, so that wasn't the case. Oh wait, let's go back down to there. Puzzle mat 1. Okay, no, so that was not the case. So yeah, we'll use the where were we? The oh, actually no, yeah, we'll stick to using the channel merge. This will work. So now we've got both of our channels merged together. We're going to go back to our grade. On RGBA. And we should be able to grade this alone. So if we come in here and we choose our puzzle mat 1 and we choose red, let's see if that works. And for some reason it is not. What is going on? Huh. Why is that not working? RGB. Our channel did not flip. Did our mirror? Yeah, no, our mirror should be working. That's weird. Okay, I'm gonna just pause this for a second because I don't know why it is not correctly lining up here. So give me a second, guys. Alright, I'm back. For some reason the mirror was not flipping the channels. So yeah, I don't know why, but as a matter of fact, I wanted it to be the same direction anyway, so I can mirror it way down here. So I just disabled that, and now that we got our channel merge set up, now it's lined up. And actually, we want it to apply. I made the mistake up here. I wanted it to mask, not applied by the channel. So we want this to be on our RGBA, but we want to mask it using our puzzle mat red. And so now if I adjust, there we go, it's only affecting those two buildings in the distance. So let's come back down here and let's look at this through here, and let's make some adjustments to these structures back here. And actually, it's taking a little longer to process. So let's start further up, just so we don't have to go through as many nodes. And the vector blur is probably also what's causing that delay. So let's zoom in here. And we could just make adjustments to our grade. Let's actually try to lift it based on the background. That might be too much. Oops. Ah, what did I do? Oh, I deleted the node. And yeah, you guys kind of get the idea. I could be in here. Making some adjustments for quite some time. Until I'm comfortable with the overall look. And just using these masks that we made with the puzzle mat, we can just keep tweaking it. So I'm going to adjust this on my own on the side until I like how it kind of blends in. And the great thing about Nuke is also it's procedural, so as we keep working in Houdini, we just load in our scene and it updates with all the stuff we already worked on. So, all right, time to pause, and I'll show you guys kind of where I'm at before we end this tutorial once I make a couple tweaks, and I'll just discuss a little bit what we're going to move on to in the next tutorial in part 3. So, be right back. Alright guys, so I ended up organizing our shot a little more and just making some adjustments. So here we've got a little more atmosphere going on, and I have a ramp controlling this gradient similar to what we've got, you know, going on in the sky. A little bit of atmosphere on this structure, not too much. And all of these nodes are set up here, so I could always just come in here and disable stuff. Yeah, right there. Or I could control the strength, so maybe I want to tone that down just a little bit. So it's not, you know, as strong. Maybe we'll go with something like this. 0.6. .75, and got our other structure back here. Believe it's this one, or no? Is that our birds? It's one of these structures. But yeah, you get the idea. So we've got our reflection on the ground, we've got our birds moving, we've got some motion blur, we've got some atmosphere added just using our puzzle mat, and we've got some matte cutout going on in the distance. So everything's looking cool. I think this is a little better of an aspect ratio. It's a little taller, so I ended up switching from, I think we had 239 or 240, and now we're using 235, so it's a little bit taller, give us a little more room up and down. And we've got our clouds going, and everything it's starting to come together across our shot. So if we come back to where we started way over here. And so this was, actually no, that's the original plate, our process plate. So this is where we were before adding our elements. And let's actually disable the mirror so you can better see things. There we are. So we've color graded things a little bit. Brought in our structure, some birds, our structures back here, our clouds, and everything's kind of coming together. And actually, I might move the camera composition a little bit down because I kind of like this little wave that we've got here. So maybe I'll bring the crop down a bit. But yeah, so hopefully you guys, you know, learned some more stuff. We got the birds going. You guys learned how to use some of the animation tools in Houdini, how to use a basic flock pop simulation to get the birds going across, how to offset the flapping, and we brought in our VDBs. So I think for our next step, now that it's, you know, starting to come together overall, we check it out like this. I think we should, for part 3, maybe bring in some of that smoke simulation with pyro, UV, this hero structure, and we don't have to use good UVs. We'll probably just use the game dev Houdini automatic UV tools, so it'll just automatically UV this, and we'll take this into Mari probably and texture it up a little bit and just add some grit and noise just so it's not so clean and smooth everywhere. And finally, once we render out our frames, I think we'll take everything into Nuke to using the world space AOVs, and we'll probably lay out some cards that will Photoshop paint, maybe some buildings or another little island or something back here. Maybe we'll add a moon. I don't know, go all the way sci-fi. I'm not sure yet. So, but this might be enough. And we'll probably end up doing some final just tweaks and adjustments, maybe with the blur tool and Nuke, just to give us a little nicer depth of field. I think these buildings now kind of blend in really well already from a distance from right here. So I think this is fine. We just need to work now, focus on our hero structure, and come in here and really get these edges adjusted so that they're nice and crisp. And that'll be that, you know, after the pyro sim and everything else. And once everything's moving, you know, this shot is only, I don't know, like 2 seconds or something if we're going at 24 frames per second. But with all this kind of composited together and moving and everything feeling alive, it'll just read well. So I think that's it. And we'll just, you know, move on to part 3 next. So bringing it all together for the final details and compositing everything and getting all our AOVs together. I think I'll use a specular AOV to kind of get maybe a little bit of a glow on some surfaces. I'm not sure yet. Or maybe we'll use a ramp to kind of get on the specular to get this kind of feeling warm, a warm glow. Kind of like what we've got here where we've got the dark ramp going up. But we'll maybe do a warm color going down, something like the beach kind of warm colors that we've got there. Since right now this is a little too gray, kind of want to bring a little warmth into here from the sun. But besides that, you know, just the final details and touch-ups and texturing this asset with little details so it reads well. I think everything will be good to go. So part 3, I think we'll be finishing this shot, animating, rendering out all the frames, and getting everything going in Nuke. So that said, you know, thanks again, guys, for all the support on Patreon. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you guys have, you know, been responding well, learning a lot of cool stuff. I get messages all the time from people talking about all the stuff they've been learning. So that makes me happy to hear. And yeah, it's, you know, this is a fun kind of a project that we're working with. A lot of these files are really big. They're starting to get pretty big. So I'm not sure how we're going to upload everything. I think you guys should go to part 1 and download some of the stuff, and then I'm only going to include the new stuff from part 2. That way we're not doubling the uploads every new tutorial part, so that you don't keep getting the same files that we already had. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, thanks again, guys, for all the support.